Hey guys, welcome back. In the last video, we talked all about the changes in the brand new version of Cubase 10.5. And in that new version was this bombshell announcement of the brand new multi-tap delay from Steinberg. This thing is a monster. And we use a lot of great quality plugins here at the studios, from the Waves Multi-Tap to Valhalla to Echo Boy. But this guy is in a league all by itself and probably one of the most powerful effects, certainly multi-tap delays available right now. It is so fun and so creative and so fun to work with that it definitely warrants an entire episode all by itself. So let's dive in and check it out. When the delay first opens up, we're presented with this interface. We got the LCD creation panel here. We have a 3-tabbed box on the top here that's got level panorama and tap parameters. And if there are no taps present in the window, this basically acts as a normal single tap delay. We have our 4 control knobs here on the left and right of the screen. We have our delay parameters here. This syncs to the project tempo, and any of the fractional choices can be chosen if the sync button's engaged. If we deactivate the sync, we can enter in the amount of milliseconds in any amount that we like. It also has a clear delay button on it as well. So for example, at our current feedback level, we have a guitar loop here. This will serve as our example. So if we have a really crazy long feedback, for example, and a ton of delay, we can clear that simply by hitting the erase delay line. That's really handy when you get a lot of complex taps involved. Feedback works like it normally does on any regular delay. The taps knob over on the right has the ability to show or hide the current taps in the delay, but in its completely clockwise position where all the taps are hidden, it is effectively a single tap delay. The bottom has the output knob. This controls the overall output of the effect itself. On the top here, we have the character of the delay itself, and we have a couple of different voices we can choose. So currently, digital modern is its default position, but we can choose vintage, we can choose tape, and some really crazy ones as well. And all of them have their own suite of controls. We can even change the sample rate of the playback. If you want to dirt it up and get a great vintage vibe, you can do that here. So let's cut that in a 4th and listen to the playback. And then even an 1/8. So super lo-fi grit and dirt if you're looking for it. This is a great place to find it. On the bottom right here under the LCD creation panel, we have the standard delay control. So we have our mix knob that controls the overall effect versus the dry signal. Spatial determines how much of the stereo field the total effect is going to occupy. And we even have the ducker section here. We're going to get more into this much later because this is an incredibly powerful feature. Next up, down here on the bottom of the interface, we have our 3 effects tabs, each of which can be enabled or disabled, and each of them have their own completely independent effects suites. The loop effects section acts like the effects send and return of a mixer, except in this example, our entire multi-tap delay is the mixer and can have all those effects applied to it. If we click the information button here, this will show us the signal flow of how the effect itself runs through the device. What's cool about this, and very unlike any other delay, is that a module added here, in addition to affecting the entire sound that goes through the effects device, can actually feed part of its effects output back into the effects input, creating a loop. So for example, if you have something like a repeating delay that has an overdrive in the loop effect sections here, every time that effect repeats, which is going to be determined by the feedback choice here on the feedback knob, more and more of that effect is going to swirl back into the input. So for example, you can have delays that get progressively crunchier or progressively more modulated or progressively more delay every time that feedback loop goes around. Let's add an effect to just our loop effects section. When we click on any of the windows, we have all of these choices to choose from for just this one tap section alone. So for example, if we add a chorus here, we have all the associated controls for the chorus itself, including its own mix knob. Each one of these has its own bypass button, and simply clicking on this enables or disables the entire section of it. So if we move the mix knob to about halfway and then play back our sample, and we can hear a really nice chorus going on the delay effect. We can even add a reverb to that, for example. So we add a reverb to that, and then we up the mix on that a bit. And now we have a nice chorus delay that's falling into reverb as it tails off. And as we continue to add more feedback to our knob here, you can hear that as it starts to go around that circle, it's feeding back into itself. And if we let it go here for a second, you'll actually hear the reverb start to develop its own crazy sound effect and chorus effect. So for example, let's put an overdrive section and let's reorder these. Any of these can be reordered simply by clicking and dragging. So for example, let's put the overdrive right after the chorus and then have the reverb be the last of the modules. And then we'll click on the overdrive and we'll add a bunch of level to it. And then we're going to pick some deliberately crazy feedback so this just goes crazy. And we'll really hear that looping effect as the output of it is fed back into the input of it. So as you can hear, this almost gets into sound design territory. And it's what I loved about working with some of the original hardware too, is that you could create loops and make the device feed back on purpose and really get into some creative sonic territory. One additional thing too is if you want to hear just what the actual delay line itself is doing, we have a sample playback button here that basically just sends a sample through the engine and tells us exactly what the delay tap sounds like by itself. So if you click it, this will give you a really good idea of just exactly what the delay is doing without having a lot of other sounds mixed in with it. For example, our guitar playback sample here is a big full loop with a lot of jangly chords going on, and that can be hard to determine exactly what each tap is doing. This is super helpful when you get a bunch of taps involved. That's the loop effects section. Let's move on to the tap effects section. So we'll go ahead and disable this. And then we're going to enable the tap effects section and expand this down here. The same thing applies here. We can choose anything from the effects library to build our master effects chain for the tap effects section, but we can only choose it one time. So we can't have two overdrives, for example, or two choruses. In addition, each of the taps themselves have their own completely independent set of parameters when addressing all of the chosen effects in the effects chain that we set up for the tap effects section. What this means is that every single tap can have its own individual delay settings, amounts, feedback, and delay timings, including some on or off. And this is true for all the effects in our effects chain. In our delay signal flowchart, this tells us exactly how each one of the taps are going to interact with the total effect. So each one of the effects has all of its own parameters, and that is played in conjunction with our delay sound, and then that is output to our regular output knob here. Let's go back and look at the LCD creation window. We have no taps present. If we start to enable the taps, which means clicking on the taps knob here and rotating it clockwise, this will hide or expose all the taps in the current patch that's been selected. You can also get rid of these simply by double clicking on them above this solid white line, and that will disable them. And if you need to recreate more in any of the positions that are available through here, you can simply double click and recreate. And you can also align them. So for example, if you want to quantize those to the pre-existing grid, hit the quantize button and it'll quantize it to the nearest division, just like it would with a MIDI part. If you want the grid to be changed, so you want this to represent instead of 16th notes, it could be 8th, click on those and then choose whichever division that you want and quantize to that, and it'll do the exact same thing. In addition to that, we can actually randomize those. So the pattern itself can change on a totally random basis just by clicking that. And you can determine what that pattern is by clicking on the randomize control panel button here. And this exposes the control panel that shows all the different features and restrictions that can be imposed on that randomizing feature. Or we can tap our own rhythm by engaging the tap tempo function. So as we play back our sample, we can tap those sections into existence. So let's clear all of them. And then while this tap rhythm is engaged, we'll tap our own tempo right on the button here. All right, so we tapped a quick little tempo there. On the fly, you can tap tempo yourself really complex rhythms really quickly, or you can do it to the song. If the song has unusual time signatures and you don't want to be synced to it, you can do that right here. So now we have a bit of an overview of what the tap effects section looks like. Let's go up and add a patch here. Let's load acoustic bounce, and this is going to load up with all of these taps currently active. So we got 6 total taps currently active. If we come down to our tap effects section, we can navigate each one of the taps by clicking on this, and this will show us all of the associated effects that are set up for that specific tap itself. In addition, the 3-tab box up here is going to show us the overall volume or level of each one of the taps as it shows left to right. And our panorama is simply going to show us where those taps are going to sit in the stereo field. Simply click and drag them to the spot that you want, and you can put them anywhere in the stereo field. The tap parameters allows us to globally edit all the things that are currently assigned to each one of the taps. So for example, tap 1 has a delay on it, and then from that section, the current delay section, we can adjust all of the effects that are specific to the delay right here just by clicking and dragging on the taps. You can also link the tabs by clicking the link button right here on the taps knob. And by clicking and dragging here, you can click and drag the entire group of taps up and down if the absolute or ABS button is checked. If absolute mode is unselect, you can click and drag each of the individual taps to your heart's content and then go back and reselect relative mode. Now when you click and drag the group, it will stay relative to their individual positions. One of the things that is the most powerful feature of this so far, and this is unusual, I haven't seen it on any other or very few other plugins, is that mix knob itself. Currently now, the wet dry mix knob is set at 25%. I can lock that. And if I lock that and load another patch, for example, it will audition that patch at exactly that same mix knob. I can also do it, for example, up here to the delay knob. I can lock that delay so that it stays at that fractional choice, and I can lock the taps knob as well so that the next patch, when we load it, we'll be able to audition the patch with the exact same wet-dry ratio with the same delay choices and the same tap choices if the current patch supports it. Let's go to the patch window and then choose a completely different patch. Let's choose analog stereo echo. Different patch, different effects, different assignments and routings, but we can audition that at the current taps, delay, and mix level. Let's check it out. All right, so this has got filter on it, it's got delay and some wah stuff going on. Let's pick another one completely. All right, so it's totally different. We got a bit crusher on this one, all kinds of stuff. So you notice right now the effects down here in the tap effects window, those controls are going to change because the effects that are applied to each one of the taps is going to change as well. But our ability to audition them and have them come back with that same level, that same wet dry mix, allows us to step through a ton of different stuff without completely going down a rabbit hole. If you're looking for new creative choices and you don't want to get lost in the tech zone, the ability to lock these settings is a great start. All right, and the third and final section of our 3 independent effects chains is going to be our post effects section. So let's go ahead and make sure that these 2 previous sections are muted. And as we expand this, we have the same choices that we had in the previous 2. Each one of these can be added to our post effects section as well. So the signal flow of our loop effects section shows us that we can treat it like a send and return on a mixer, but has the added benefit of having its output fed back into its input, creating a loop. In our tap effects section, we can see that each one of the individual taps themselves have their own suite of effects that can be added to the delay. And our third and final one is our post effects section, which basically affects everything coming out of the delay, including the loop effects itself. So a huge amount of creative possibilities here. So currently what we have in our post effects section is we have a chorus, we have an envelope filter, and we have a delay. And these all have their own mute and solo buttons, so we can hear just what each one of those is doing. Let's take a look at just the delay section itself and hear what that's doing, and we'll go ahead and mute the chorus and the envelope filter. All right, so as you can hear, the effects in the post effects section are affecting the multi-tap pattern that we created back in the tap effects section. And that is creating some really cool and interesting polyrhythmic stuff. All right, so now that we know some of the creative possibilities that this thing is capable of, it's time to put it to the test in a small project that we're creating. All right, we have our keys bed track set up, and we're going to go into our edit window and choose the input that we need, and then we're going to arm the track and then start the metronome. our keys bed tracks are recorded, and now they're nice and dry and tight. All right, and we need something to spread this out and give this track a little bit of life and a little bit of space to it and everything. So we are going to navigate up to our patch window, and we're going to come down to load presets, and we're going to navigate down to a preset called E Piano Enhancer. And the reason why is this is a really unusual patch in the sense that it shows a lot of the features of this that may not be first evident. So for example, if we just hit the sample playback button so that we can actually hear what each tap is doing, even though we have 3 taps over here in the window, we can't see anything other than what looks to be 1 tap here on the grid. So all we're currently hearing right now is just the master quarter note sync delay setting. And the reason why is because all of the taps, all 3 of them, start exactly at the same time, which brings us to the spread mode. That's this guy. In that mode, what it does is it spreads out all the available taps that are currently in the patch, even if they're on top of one another, just to make editing easier. Meaning this doesn't change the actual orientation of the taps, because if these truly were out on the grid like this, you would be hearing a multi-tap pattern that would be later delayed by our master clock setting. But we're not. These are all on top of one another, which means they all happen immediately. There is no multi-tap pattern to hear because they all start right at 0. All you're really hearing is just the master clock sync, which is currently at a quarter note. But all of these make very good use of our tap effects section. So each one of the 3 taps is using our phaser and our envelope filter. And this is going to give us a big, swirling, rich background for that keys bed track to occupy. If we come down here to panorama, we can see that in that spread out position, this seems to make a lot more sense now. Our first tap, it's hard panned all the way to the left side, and our middle one is straight up, and our third tap is hard panned to the right. And then these are the individual levels of them as well. So this is a really good example where this little button, this spread button, comes in really handy. And then moving on down to our post effects section, which has got a little bit of overdrive on it as well, which helps to give a little bit of grit to that tail. And then we've got a reverb that's following that as well. So all those delay effects fall into that overdrive and then eventually the reverb, and we get that big, beautiful chorus wash. Now that we've got the key beds track finished and we've got some nice spatial effects rounding that track out, it's time to move on to put some leads down and then put this delay to test on that. Back to our tracking project, we open our edit window and select our new hardware inputs for our mono synth. We arm the track and start our metronome. All right, we've got our lead synth patched down. Now it's time to add a little bit of life and movement and vibe to it. So we're going to go up to our patch window and we're going to navigate down to a patch called Complex Tremolo. And this is really a unique patch because it really illustrates some of the complex textures you can get after the delay dies out. We're going to set the sync actually to a half instead of a whole because that's a whole lot of delay. We're going to leave all the rest of the settings where they are. There's no loop effects currently, and that's why that window is gray. So if there was anything there, if there was a module there, that would be blue. Otherwise, we would simply just disable it. In the tap effects section, we've got an auto pan in the effects chain. And as the delay line begins to die out, you can really hear the effects tail being panned left and right super fast. We got an overdrive to grit things up a bit and an envelope filter to add some movement. Frequency-wise, we got a phaser and a flanger going on, and then eventually a filter at the end of that. And then in our post-effects section, we've got a reverb and then a vibrato at the end of the reverb just to move the reverb around a little bit. The whole thing sounds like this. All right, so you can hear as it dies out, that auto pan is kicking in and adding some really cool kind of stutter edits to it at the end. And then the overdrive helps kind of grit that up with a little bit of lo-fi goodness. And then the phaser and flanger help kind of move that around, and the filter takes the top off. That's a really fun patch to play with for that, and it really gives that synth patch a lot of life. However, we are noticing one really unique thing here, and this is the last feature we're going to talk about, and that is the ducking feature. And what this does, if you listen to where the delay is playing, sometimes those delay trails get a little bit busy and jumbled, and they're covering up the actual pattern of the delay when it plays back. Anytime where the actual synth part itself, the mini moog part, is playing, or this could be true of a singer, for example, as well, where like a singer is singing, and you don't want that articulation or those vocal parts to get covered up, in this case, our mini moog part to get covered up, we can use this feature here. And I think this is one of the coolest features on a multi-tap. This is the ducking feature, and we have a couple of ways to control things here. If we click on the DL button here, that means it's going to erase the delay line every time it repeats. This is great for creating throw delays where you don't want the delay on top of the vocal, and then the amount knob right here is going to duck the entire delay effect by this percentage amount. And then this is going to work like a compressor. It's going to come in and out at that speed. Currently at 60 milliseconds. We can make it slower if we wanted to, a little bit smoother. And if we want that to duck it out even more, when it's playing, we could up that amount. And we can also even have it do it to the feedback. So if we had a ton of feedback going on where there's lots and lots and lots of repeats, we could have those repeats be dialed back a little bit, meaning shortened while we play. And then when we're done playing, comes back up and blooms up around the part again. The whole thing sounds like this. Let's solo it so we can hear this clearly. So if we're really extreme about this, let's just crank this. All right, so you can tell that's way too much, but you can hear what it's doing clearly by that. It's literally ducking or reducing the delay amount. And this is a really good example, like especially where a vocalist is singing and you don't want the delays to cover them up. Now, these delays are pretty wild, admittedly, and we would probably back off quite a few of them. Currently, we don't have any feedback. If we had more than the one delay at a half a second, you would hear a lot more of those trails lasting a lot longer, and they would get in the way a lot more too. So this allows us to duck the amount of delay and even the amount of feedback, dial it back by that percentage only when the performer's performing. All right, and for the last thing, we're going to go up to our patch window and navigate down to a patch called Ding Dong. And this is a really good example of some of the pitch shifting abilities of this effect. And this is one of the most fun ones, I think, to play with. We're going to leave our mix knob locked at where it was before and simply audition what we have. So this is taking the incoming note and it's adding a pitch shifter effect to it after a filter was applied. In our loop effects section, we've got a chorus that thickens it up before it hits it. And in the post effects section, we got an auto pan applying that same kind of cool motion. And then we got an overdrive to thicken it all up a little bit. And this is what it sounds like in the mix. All right, so I know this has been a long one. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me on this one. This has been Steinberg's brand new multi-tap monster. This shows up in Cubase Artist and Pro versions 10.5 and higher. So even if this is the only thing they changed, it would be more than worth the money. It's been a joy and a creative tool. So if you guys learned something, please hit the subscription and notification bells, and we will see you in the next video.